Hello, good evening to all of you, and welcome to another edition of the Joy News and Amalgamation of Professional Bodies speaker series. My name is Winston Amwa, and this evening, the calls for a structural transformation and a complete reset of Ghana's economy have become louder and more urgent. But the critical question before us is this: where do we begin from and how? Now, that is why tonight's discussion is under the topic Transforming Ghana's Economy, Time for a Mindset Revolution. Is both timely and essential. What is it that we must do in this time? What policies, programs must change? What attitudes must change in order that we achieve that much talked about economic transformation that we all desire? What roles must all of us play, starting from our president and you, most importantly? Now, leading this conversation for the next 45 minutes will be David Ofosu-Dorte, who is founder and senior partner at AB and David Africa. After his presentation, we'll dive deeper with a panel discussion featuring some of the country's foremost minds in economics and finance. Now, joining us live in the studio is Professor Godfrey Bokwing, who is an economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. And also joining via Zoom will be Professor Peter Quarter, who is director of the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economic Research at the University of Ghana. Now, stay with us because it promises to be an enlightening and action-driven conversation. Don't forget, we're live on DSTV channel 421, GoTV channel 125. We're also streaming live on all our social media platforms, including Facebook, YouTube, and X at Joy News on TV, and around the world on myjoyonline.com. The show is interactive, so you can definitely share your thoughts with us live on our social media handles at Joy News on TV, and we get to share those thoughts with the rest of the world. Now, when I return after these short break, David Ofosu-Dorte will take us through his breathtaking presentation, after which we'll zoom into a panel conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, so welcome back, and it's now time for that breathtaking presentation by David Ofosu-Dorte on mindset shift. He's ready. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Winston. I'm not sure if it's breathtaking. I've just accepted to share my thoughts on the invitation of the Joy FM and Amalgamation of Professional Bodies speaker series, and I chose to speak on Transforming Ghana's Economy, the Time for a Mindset Revolution. I won't venture into attempting to define mindset. I have Prof. Bokwing here. I'm sure he will have a very well set out academic definition of mindset. But the reason I won't do that, among other things, is that I believe we all have a good idea of what it is. Neither will I attempt to define transformation, because essentially we all have an idea of what it is when it comes to transformation. We constantly desire it and look for it in many ways. And it also comes when we recognize some opportunity that we think it helps us to transform ourselves from what we are to something better. After all, we managed to transform ourselves from a colony into an independent country. And in the early days, I believe we managed to transform ourselves into some form of a light industrialized country. But transformation actually is a constant. It is something that must be continuous, because others will catch up with you, and whether you continue leading is the challenge. Or at times, what you have transformed that look good becomes less of what the value that it had as time goes on. And you'll find that today the US, for example, doesn't have fast trains. China has, and US trains are essentially out of date. That's how society evolves. So transformation involves or requires a fair bit of modernization as time goes on. And it's for this reason of the desire for transformation that over the years we have gone for a 7-year development plan in the in the 60s, which in my view, reading from history, was partially well delivered. And then we come to the 70s under the Kutu Acheampong regime, much maligned for various things, But to some extent, the vision of capturing the commanding heights from history and from recent research indicates that it was fairly well delivered, among other things, to say the least, managed to give Ghana some significant shareholding in some gold mines, which of course we have subsequently sold. The other transformation visions that we have had include Vision 2020, GPRS 1 and 2, Better Ghana, Transforming Lives, and the most recent one, Ghana Beyond Aid. Of course, Ghana Beyond Aid, we ended up in more aid that we wanted to go beyond. Now, all these transformation agendas, which was either partially delivered or not wholly delivered at all, had certain challenges. The two major ones are what was generally called external factors, and the other is the so-called macroeconomic challenges. And Prof is here, I'm sure he can speak more about the macroeconomic challenges. So I just categorize everything into just two. Now, we are at the threshold of having another opportunity to transform. And are we going to have a situation where between now and 2030, we will excuse ourselves with another macroeconomic challenges and external factors that prevent us from transforming? I do not have the answer, but I saw that it's important that we examine what other things contribute to these things. And I thought mindset and attitudes are one of the things or part of the areas that we tend to overlook as we focus a lot on the economic aspect of it. So I will take a look at some of these traditional challenges, especially the macroeconomic aspects, and see what, in my view, amounts to mindset issues and attitudinal issues that contribute to that. Ghana and Ghanaian leaders like to give examples regarding those who have managed to transform their economies consistently. And Singapore, of course, the most famous example, had independence about the same time as us, much, much smaller than us, about the size of Accra, much, much smaller population, but highly successful, and one of the richest countries per capita, and consistently successful for about 3, 4, or 5 decades. If you examine the Singapore history, the summary of what helped them will include strong leadership, which a lot of Ghanaians at times call for, strategic investments, and a mindset that enabled Singapore become one of the least corrupt countries in the world. So they succeeded in eliminating corruption. And some of the things they did were unconventional, but today it has become a mindset that the whole society lives with. And it's become so pro-business, it has one of the lowest tax rates in the whole world. Now, if you look at Singapore and you compare that to Ghana across, you will find that these are things that we will wish we have, but we don't. So as I indicated, I was going to focus on what are the issues that we tend to focus on, or we tend not to focus on when it comes to the so-called macroeconomic challenges when we seek to transform, because those are the excuses we give ourselves all the time. So let's deal with inflation. Now, and it's a topic I like talking about a lot, because we tend to focus a lot on the monetary policy approach to fighting inflation, which I have nothing against. The question I always ask is whether that is the only approach that we must adopt. Just this morning, whilst I was trying to put some points down for this session, I realized there was an IMF news piece that Ghana's inflation has dropped to 21% and will drop to 17% by end of year 2025. I took a look at Nigeria and I got 25%. But of course, dropping from 54%, which we had about a couple of years ago, to 21% is remarkable. But Nigeria, 25%, Angola, 21%, Botswana, 2.7%, Kenya, 3.5%, Liberia, 10.7%, Mauritius, 0.8%, less than 1%, Rwanda, 3.8%. The question I ask myself is, why is Ghana not in the single-digit category? And I remember in the past, whenever any government attained single-digit inflation, it was news. And at times, even 11% was described as single-digit. To the best of my arithmetic, 11% is not single-digit. But nevertheless, we pride ourselves in attaining this single-digit inflation. So inflation as a macroeconomic indicator is very important. And indeed, it is so important that it can lead political parties to lose power. So that is how important it is. But let us look at what are some of the peculiar habits we overlook that, in my view, are the soft issues that we overlook in our macroeconomic environment and management, and that in some ways, affect inflation beyond the monetary policy committee. The first one is a mindset of keeping stock. We like to hold on to things. I had occasion to be speaking to a very big man in the financial sector some time ago who had a house, and he said he wanted to dispose of the house because he needed some money. Then somebody informed the mother that he wanted to dispose of the house, and the mother called him and said, look, if you dispose of this house, they will say you are Kwasi Ampeni. I don't know what Kwasi Ampeni, how to put it in English, but so he kept the house. In other words, it is a mindset that allows us to hold on to an asset that we can turn into liquid or cash just because we like holding on to assets. That's not the culture of other societies, especially societies who measure their inflation by monetary policy approaches that we do use here. So the mindset in one way or the other affects us. I don't know if you've noticed this, if you just drive around Accra, those who deal in second-hand cars. There are times a car has been at that place for 5 to 6 years. It's not bought. They will never reduce to clear. It's very difficult to find a situation in Ghana where somebody is reducing something to clear. They hold on to it, even though the thing is losing its value. Take accommodation, which is a significant part of the consumer price index, rent. We take 2 years advance. In a typical Western society which measures monetary policy or inflation by using monetary policy index, nobody is going to ask you for 2 years advance. These days, if you are lucky, you get 1 year advance. At best, you pay some 3 months security deposit, and then you do pay your monthly rent. There are many houses in Accra which are empty and have not had tenants for a very long time, but they are not going to reduce the advance that they need. It's a mindset issue and has very little to do with monetary policy being fixed. Now, if you have a situation where highly educated middle-class people would rather keep an empty house than reduce the advance that they take, that is a mindset issue and we need to deal with it. Look at transportation, which again is a significant part of the expenditure that contributes to inflation. It's one of the most hydra-headed problems that we have. It starts with a huge power we give to private driver unions. Ghana Road Transport, a private road transport union, Progressive Transport a union, Cooperative, Road Haulage Association, etc. If you ever took the chance to read the constitution of the GPRTU as an example, they have a provision, I think it's Article 21 or 25 of that constitution, which says that if a driver is at what they call scale, in other words, you are loading, and the scale is not full, the vehicle is not full, you do not move. Essentially, it's what we call in transportation a full load factor concept. So it is a seller's market, it's not a buyer's market. The only vehicle you can join is the one on scale. You don't have any option. And remember, we gave the power to GPRTU and those people who manage the stations to also control the stations. So the choice is not given to those who want to board a vehicle, but to those who are running the vehicle. Then there is a provision which allows the executive of those associations to run more trips on the basis that they have done some good to the association. So what will happen is that over the period, you will see it that added to congestion, the frequency of trips, for example, between here and Tema, has constantly reduced from 10 trips a day to 6 to now maximum about 3 that you can do because of the full load factor concept. But in fixing transportation prices, it is obvious that at 60 load factor, in other words, if your occupancy rate is 60, you are breaking even. So all vehicles load here on the basis of a full load factor concept. Yet, the price fixing is so strange that the moment government increases fuel for a period, for a certain percentage, The cartel, and this time the cartel are all grouped under something called the Ghana Road Transport Coordination Council, GRTTC, can increase the fuel price at their own choice, at times by negotiations with government and government to convince them to reduce it. Previously, we made the things even worse by passing PNDC Law 317. Some of us campaigned vehemently for the repeal of that law. It was repealed under Act 863, the Road Traffic Act. What did PNDC Law 317 do? It empowered the GPRTU to be able to arrest other road offenders of commercial vehicles. And as a result, they created a training school in Sunyani and were able to become a force which did not only have powers of arrest, but also had powers of control of the terminals, which by law under LI 1961 are actually belong to the assemblies. So essentially, you have a situation where transport operators lock out the choice of those who want to board vehicles and dictate the price. It doesn't end there. We have something called market queens. These market queens control who controls the goods and brings the goods from the farms to the markets that we buy from. And you will notice that if you actually went to a typical farm gate to buy any produce, the produce is very competitive across West Africa. But by the time it gets to the market, it's not competitive because the post-harvest cost build-up of transportation adds almost 100% to the cost of the produce. Yet, I have not seen any macroeconomic policy that addresses these examples of things which add to the inflation or contribute to the inflation. So it appears that we have designed ourselves to solve problems, including problems we don't face. And we leave the real problems we face aside. Indeed, how prices are fixed in this country is like the peace of the Lord. It passeth all understanding. Now, it is important that we look at how these issues should be addressed. Otherwise, addressing it by simply ensuring that monetary policy are controlled may be fine, but you are addressing only 30 million people, out of which 40, only about 4 million are reported to have bank accounts. And the real problem and the other things, attitudes and mindsets which contribute to it are not dealt with. A crusade of a conscious effort of stimulating or rather ensuring that prices are fixed by scientific means ought to be done. There are several measures, that we can adopt, but we cannot go into all that in this short period. For example, the introduction of scale of measurement in the markets, which some of our neighboring countries have done, have led to the situation whilst comparatively they have a lower inflation when it comes to food. And it's important we take a look at some of those things. FX challenges is another macroeconomic challenge that we talk about all the time. But we all know that we live in a dollarized mindset. When we are giving you the price, we have somewhere in the back of our mind converted it into the dollar. So the dollar is a very important part of our thinking. So we pretend to be spending cedis all right, but all our thinking is in dollars, including how we fix our rent. Yet, these are issues that we don't deal with. The best, of course, we can do is to issue statements that we should not price things in dollars, which we don't. But if we have indexed them in dollars, it's as good as having priced them in dollars. Added to the fact that we tend to prefer foreign goods. So even the things we produce, we like to import them. It actually takes me back to the campaign which was conducted in the Champon regime, where there was a conscious effort to encourage consumption of made in Ghana goods, especially made in Ghana, food produced in Ghana. Today, I know many Ghanaians who, if they are traveling, would like to take a tin of middle from Ghana or want to take pig milk as against other milk, because those days we were consciously encouraged to consume these which were then made in Ghana. And that's how come they became the goods that we prefer as against others. Some of those conscious efforts we need to do and move away from the mindset which enables us import yemwadie. I don't know whether there's an English equivalent of what yemwadie is. At the last time where there was a discussion on inflation I was following, grapes had contributed a significant part of our imports. Foreign rice. Now, there are times that for the public sector, even when the thing is being produced here, importation is a procurement opportunity. And that procurement opportunity provides corruption for them to get some amount of money. And as a result, they will nevertheless import, notwithstanding the fact that we could have saved the foreign exchange. So when we turn around to complain about the dollar to CD exchange rate, we forget that the mindset that is contributing to it is a mindset that requires us to be corrupt by procuring from outside and by consuming things we otherwise produce here. It is this collective mindset that define how we design our programs, how we implement our policies, and how we respond to developments. And it is for this reason I thought we should be discussing these things whenever we are talking about transformation. Because if we don't look at them, we will assume the transformation will deliver itself. If you have a society where there is a strong belief in demons and witchcraft as being responsible for our poverty, it is likely that our mindset will let us devote more time to prayer than to action. And again, these are things that we need to talk about. I remember there was an occasion where there was a whole prayer session organized to pray into the Akosombo, and the level of the lake had gone down at that time with the hope that prayer was going to bring the water level up. I'm not so sure if the water level came up after those prayers anyway. I do believe in prayers and I do pray every day. But it appears that we act less and pray more. And that type of mindset are things that we need to deal with, both as a people and as leaders. Now, if we overlook these mindset issues, they are the software on which our national hardware is built. So once we pursue transformation, it is important to understand that once these mindsets are built up, it becomes a reason why people may flee to go abroad. And in fleeing, there is a mindset which encourages some people to give as much as $10,000 to somebody to just help them go abroad. That $10,000 is significant capital if you wanted to do any business in Ghana. But it is the mindset which tells them that the greener pastures is going to get more. That is what makes them spend that amount of money to go out. It is that same mindset which drives everybody to go into politics, or most people, at least, not to solve problems, but to transform their personal selves in order to become better than others. It is the same mindset which helps us to choose who we want to vote for each time that we are disappointed, with the hope that somebody will deliver the transformation. So it is important we address this mindset. From whatever angle we look at it, it is important that these are things which are part of the things we need to be concerned about. So let's assume that we have come up with a very big transformation scheme. Do we have the can-do spirit as a people? And it's an important question that we need to ask. Because if the people don't have a can-do spirit, they cannot deliver the transformation. Transformation cannot be delivered by the leader who makes the vision alone. And as somebody said, if you believe you can do, or if you believe you can't do, you are both right. The one who believes he can do, and the one who believes he can't. It's as simple as that. So, it is important that we build that confidence in ourselves to be able to deliver the things that will transform the society. Confidence rests on three things. First is self-confidence. The ability that, or the attitude that makes us believe we can do. Second is confidence in the system. We must have that confidence that the system will enable us to do what we promise to do. Unfortunately, we have constantly undermined ourselves and the system, and we don't seem to believe in the system anymore. A system that encourages indiscipline will not build confidence of the people in the system. And indiscipline is part of the mindset that we need to deal with. We lack confidence in our leaders. Yes, it is good for us to have confidence in our leaders, but confidence must be earned. it cannot be conjured. It is earned from the consistency by which the leaders deliver the things they promise. And once they are consistent, we will build that confidence in them. And then at least of the three, the self-confidence, the confidence in the system, and the confidence in the leaders, if you have one or two, our ability to deliver transformation will be faster. If we have none of these, we must as well forget transformation. Now, there are examples of nations who have developed by ensuring that they build the confidence of the people. US, for example, build the confidence of the people and their belief and their mindset in their desire to dominate. And you will see that they like to just dominate. China built the resilience of its people, constantly talking about its 5,000 years of history. Whilst Russia will always encourage its people about the power that they have. And at times, the words which people use in society reflect the mindset that they have. And I will touch on this as we go on. So those who transform societies can do it faster when they ensure that there are three things. One, that the entire group buy into the transformation agenda, or at least the majority of them. Is there any conscious effort to ensure that Ghanaians buy into a transformation agenda as a whole? I remember my first trip to Singapore at the time Smile Singapore was being implemented. Even the taxi driver knew what the agenda was and could explain it to you. Two, the society must adopt a transformation mindset that drives people to believe that we are seeking to actually attain a specific goal. And three, they must trust their leaders. And as I indicated, trust is earned. Now, if you have had a situation where consistently transformation agenda have failed, that trust is very low. And those who seek to deliver transformation have a lot of work to do in order to rebuild that trust. The other mindset that is worth talking about, beyond the macroeconomic challenges one I have talked about, is the systemic disempowerment of our people. We are so consciously disempowered as ordinary people. If you take the leaders aside, the rest of the people are disempowered. Indeed, many of our leaders are themselves disempowered. And I will illustrate a few. The disempowerment has resulted from many things. First, from chieftaincy itself, which has been with us since time immemorial, where we worshipped those who led us and carried them shoulder high. From slavery, where we became subjects either of our own countrymen and kinsmen whose tribe had conquered ours, or when we became slaves and shipped abroad to other places because we were sold by those who were our leaders or we were captured by force. A people's history can affect their mindset over the period. It goes into their DNA over generations. Colonization is part of the things which affected our mindset. Being independent, which very often we confuse with self-rule. Now, so far as I'm concerned, we were never a dependent nation. Dependence means to me that we were relying on another group of people. Being ruled by others led us into self-rule when we got what is quote-unquote independence. It appears to me that we are more dependent today than we were previously. But for the purpose of this discussion, let us use the word independence interchangeably with self-rule. Then we had post-colonial leaders, some of which were dictatorial, good or bad. Those were the order of the day. Then the civilian and military. Over the period, you can see that we have developed a culture where we worship our leaders. And a society which worships its leaders, including carrying those whose forefathers sold them into slavery, is a disempowered society. We may not like to say it as it is, but that indeed is what it is. We are highly disempowered. As a result, we tend to see those who go into political leadership as those who are solely responsible to transform the society. But that is not true. We are all responsible for this transformation if we want to transform the society. Unfortunately, multi-party democracy has worsened it. Multi-party democracy, which were supposed to liberate us, also have led to the situation where a duopoly of parties have led us to align on one side or the other with the view that at each turn we will be able to transform our individual selves by aligning to political parties. And as a result, we have actually created a mindset where we even try to worship leaders much more than we were previously. So you will find that we focus so much on politics that the things which will create the confidence in the society and the can-do spirit is lost. I am here to see something similar to what we had in the 60s. That, I mean, you had mega projects, and I'll touch on one or two of them. Or what Russia did when they launched Sputnik 1 and went to space. Or America's famous moonshot. Or China's desire to come back and reclaim its glory. And you see that China's growth led to where there was a conscious effort to build a mindset of hard work, introducing the concept of 996, where everybody, private or public sector, was encouraged to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, 6 days in a week. If you introduce this in Ghana's democracy, it's going to create a lot of problems for our leaders. But in a country with very low productivity, increasing productivity by various means is important, and I will return to the productivity subject. So you will see that China made a conscious effort to upskill its human capacity, and that is why it is able to produce goods at a very cheaper rate. And it's also introduced innovation and encouraged innovation so much so that the drive to innovate was a national crusade. A joke is told about an African evangelist who got to China and spoke to a Chinese and asked him whether he has heard of Jesus Christ. And he said, no, but if you give me a sample, I will produce it. Now, that's a joke, but it illustrates the spirit of a people who believe they can do and were ready to innovate about anything. And that is the kind of thing we need if we want to transform. So the segments of society that need to have a transformation mindset is not only our political leaders. Business leaders need to have a transformation mindset. Business leaders in this country tend to like to glorify themselves over small achievements. Much worse, when they are even leading associations, very often they are in a hurry to exclude the others by liaising with political leaders to get something for themselves and forget the others. Think tanks need to also have a transformation mindset. SOEs need to have a transformation mindset. Media men need to have a transformation mindset. So, Winston, you are not excluded from the list, and I'll have a suggestion for you as to how you would drive this transformation mindset. And then the masses need to have a transformation mindset. Indeed, I will take an example of both China and Singapore again, who consciously encourage entrepreneurial mindset. There is a lot of encouragement of entrepreneurial mindset in this country, but somehow it comes from NGOs and people who are public-spirited, and it is done in bits and pieces. A national crusade on entrepreneurship is a necessary requirement for transformation. That way, the transformation comes from different angles. We need to deal with another mindset, the systemic disunity mindset, where everything, irrespective of what you say, falls on whether NDC or MPP. So you will see that we spend copious amount of time discussing the term of office of a political party or of the president, and nobody discusses the cost of office and how much that cost of office affects the extent to which we are taxed. But as I indicated, the reason I agreed to give this talk is because we have another opportunity to transform. And every government brings an agenda as to how it seeks to transform. Under this government, there are three key things that I have heard, each of which has been variously defined by its various spokespersons. You may not be able to narrow down the definitions necessarily, but that is not my goal. My goal at this stage is to look at what are the things that are meant to drive transformation, as I have heard. There are three things. One is reset. the reset agenda. The other one is the 24-hour economy. And the third one is the big push. And I have tried to look at how transformation can be driven by each of these. And I want to focus on the mindset component of this. I am particularly interested in the big push, and I am hoping to see what it contains when the big push is launched. The last time I heard, I think it's expected to be launched very soon. Now, the big push, whatever will come into it, and I think I did hear one minister say recently to contain 12 major projects. I don't have any idea what the projects are. But I had occasion last Friday to interact with some top executives from the Water River Authority. And this is during their 64th anniversary. And during the interaction, I drew the attention that at times we are called for a moment in time like this. And I asked them to cast their mind back perhaps to when Kwame Nkrumah envisaged the dam, whether it was possible to create a dam and do 1,200 megawatts of power. It must have been a very big dream at that time, with all its accompaniments, Valco as a smelter, the refinery which was never built, and the entire bauxite to aluminum chain, which for the last 60 years we have toyed with. There was an attempt during the last government, GIADEC was created, so there has been some progress, but the full integrated chain has still not been done. But I want to focus just on that big dream of the Akosombo Dam. It was not only delivered, it was delivered ahead of schedule. That's very important. And the president at that time was personally chair of the delivery, and it was delivered ahead of schedule with all the challenges of that time. Now, that 1,200 megawatts was a big dream. And if I take VRA as an organization, perhaps the next major change was when there was a discussion as to whether to take hydro alone or to add thermal when we had power crisis. Well, it currently has both hydro and thermal. But why am I talking about that? My attention was drawn to the fact that even though it may be the biggest of all the IPPs to this stage, we are talking only about 3,000 megawatts of power. And my recommendation to them is that I will expect under the big push that an organization like VRA should be looking at 20 megawatts of power or 20 gigawatts. Where does that come from? There are studies which shows that for this country to industrialize, we need a base load of 20,000 megawatts. One of the statements which incensed me a lot, and this is not the first time I'm talking about it in public, was a statement that was constantly made by some politicians in the past, that we have excess power. There is no more annoying statement. That statement really annoys me. 6,000 megawatts of installed capacity cannot be excess power. Your inability to distribute the power does not make it excess power. A country cannot industrialize with 6,000 megawatts of power, period. So I'm looking at what is the next big agenda on the Akosombo Dam, and what is the next big agenda for VRA, and what is the next big agenda of the whole of the Akosombo itself, which has got several angles that can be used, from transportation to a growth corridor, to fluvial advantage, to hauling of mining including iron ore, to jetties, to a number of things, including even shipyards on the lake. These are advantages that can be taken just from that lake alone. You cannot deliver a 24-hour economy without power. And 24-hour economy is a good transformation agenda so far as I am concerned. And it must focus on productivity. Again, some of you must have seen the paper I wrote on the Hydra-headed problems that is faced by the Ministry of Energy, especially if he intends to bring private sector into the energy sector. It's important that we focus on the need to increase the power. Now, there are other opportunities we do have. For example, Ghana's location itself, if we decide to leverage aviation fuel and lower aviation fuel, can make us a hub for aviation. These are examples, and because of time, I will skip. But before I move to the next segment, I want to draw attention that the mindset we inherited from the colonial government is the one which gave us a railway, all of which ended at the two ports, Tema or Takrady. In other words, we were designed to create a situation where our natural resources were shipped out of the country. The mindset we need is a mindset that enables us to add value within the country. If you take bauxite as an example, a typical ton of bauxite will range anything between $35 to $60 per ton, based on the period and how the metal prices are doing. But if you add value to it, you are talking about $2,000. And if you go further downstream to aluminum foils, you are talking about $6,000. So value addition is something that can benefit us. And we are capable, and we do have everything that it takes. But it cannot be achieved if VRA is operating at the current state that it is in terms of the size of its power. So a big dream is quite important. We cannot increase our ICT in an era where data centers and the rest are the order of the day, where cloud computing consumes so much electricity, if we do not understand that we need to increase our power capacity. Of course, I do understand that we do have energy sector debt, but there is no problem which cannot be solved if you put your heads around it. Anytime we allow money to become the excuse of our non-performance, we have actually added to our mindset that drives us not to do. I've already talked about railways and mining. Now, it's important to ensure that a lot of the infrastructure projects that we design are done with a view to giving us exponential growth and not incremental growth. We have passed the stage of incremental growth, where we are constantly counting GDP growth in terms of just a few decades. We cannot transform with incremental GDP growth. And it's important that we take a look at these mindsets and how to change them. How, for example, do we reverse the systemic disempowerment mindset that I have talked about? We must look at the subtle words we use. The words we use betray the mindset that we have. I will touch on a few. We seem to have a set of words that reveal how much we don't believe in ourselves. Of course, these words, at times, we import them. So, for example, we call both development finance institutions outside Ghana and not inside Ghana, because we do have the development bank, and we don't call that. In fact, many years ago, we did have NIB, which was supposed to be a development finance institution. We turned it into an ordinary bank. Hopefully, it may be revamped. I'm not so sure whether that will happen soon or not. But we do call development finance institutions and foreign governments from the West and from the East development partners. I have always wondered, who is the other partner? Are we the development partners? Do we believe and call ourselves development partners? Or they are the development partners and we are the underdevelopment partners? I am not so sure why we use that word. Let's look at another word, another phrase, local content. Very famous word. I have had occasion to help advise on certain laws that deal with local content and advise clients on local content. But why local content? It reveals a mindset. It is talking about a situation where the resource which is yours, you focus on which component of that resource you should play in. Shouldn't we be thinking about foreign content? If the resource is ours, should we not be focusing on to what extent is foreign content allowed? But because we buy these things from the schools that we go to, we buy into these words, and therefore you will see that what we fight for is the extent to which local purchases are made, the extent to which some amount of equity we are allowed to take, and the extent to which some people are engaged below the top management level. Because the concept of local content is that you have to ensure that as you invest, you do not cheat the locals. But are there no local investors? China drove its investments, FDIs, by encouraging local investors to bring foreign investors. I highly recommend a mindset where our drive to achieve foreign direct investors is centered around encouraging local investors to bring foreign investors and partner with them. And they, at their business level, can negotiate what their relationship is, whether the local content or foreign content. It's important that we encourage people to be able to take these bold steps and incentivize them when they do. If we have a situation where we do not trust the system, do not trust our abilities, see others as those who are capable of developing us, that lack of trust will reduce the speed with which we are able to develop. It is important that those that we assign the responsibility to transform are benchmarked. And if they cannot perform within a specified period, I recommend 18 months. They are removed. And the proposal that they make to transform should be made public. So I'm talking about public appointees, so SOEs, chief executives, etc. And 18 months is enough for the person to show whether or not he or she is on course to attain the goal. If we do this, then it is possible for the general public to be a check on them. It is also necessary that we create a mindset where we encourage innovation, and we are very innovative people. If you want to check that, check the way we have been very innovative when it comes to funerals. The funeral industry is the most advanced industry in all forms. Very, very advanced. It is important that we take that kind of innovation to other sectors. In this country, we can actually let a dead body stand as a corpse as we lay it in state. That's how advanced our funeral industry has become. So we should encourage this innovation in other sectors. As the world begins to change, we should begin to adapt. We have the AFCFTA Secretariat here. To what extent are we actually driving a crusade to ensure that we take advantage of what some people call the gravity equation? Essentially, they believe that the closer countries are with each other, the higher their trade. Let me put it in that simple terms. But clearly, if you look at intra-Africa trade, as we all know, we are at about 15 to 16%, once we are more eager to trade with Europe and the rest, other than trade with us. Ghana, with the fellow Africans, Ghana can make a change. Now, why is this important? One of the reasons we are poor is that it is difficult to make much money from our exports. It's easier to export a ton of pineapple to Europe in terms of cost than it is to export it to Nigeria or Cameroon. And the answer to that is very simple. To go to Cameroon with your ton of pineapple, you need to first ship it to Europe, which is 90 cents, and bring it back for another $1, and it's $1.90. Now, if I ship it direct to Europe, it's only 90 cents. But if I ship it to Cameroon, it's $1.90. So it impedes the trade. But why is that so? It used not to be so. The answer is very simple. There are no liner vessels around Africa. Liner vessels are simply ships which move from dock to dock on a scheduled service, just like you can fly from here to UK on British Airways. Because of lack of that, you have to charter the vessels. But we used to have liner vessels. That is why we have something called Black Star Line. The essence of Black Star Line was for it to move from a specified place to specified place. Now, government doesn't spend money to introduce a liner vessel. It's for government to recognize the strategic importance of liner vessels and negotiate with persons and give them the appropriate incentives for them to introduce liner vessels in order that we can dominate intra-Africa trade. After all, if we don't change this mindset, we will remain a people whose mindset is all geared towards trading with foreigners, and we will be having that same colonial mindset which made us prefer foreign schnapp to local drinks. Everything foreign, because we can't trade with our neighbors. Our leaders even prefer to meet foreigners more than local people. A few years ago, I had occasion, my firm had occasion to sponsor an investment event that took place in London. And at the end of that event, the organizer, who was a British, called me and said they were giving a 5-minute appearance to the big politician who was representing the government at that conference. Just 5 minutes because we were a sponsor. And I said I wasn't interested. He asked why. He said, if I meet him for 5 minutes, I can tell him a lot of things. I said, if it has to take you to let me meet the person I live in the same country with, then I'm not interested. But that is the truth. It is easier for foreigners to meet our leaders than it is for our leaders to meet their people, except when you are part of the political party. I recommend a mindset that makes it easier for our business people as a group to interact with our leaders. I've already mentioned the 24-hour economy and its equivalent and how the Chinese did it. But the 24-hour economy, for me, is one of the things we should focus on productivity. This aspect on productivity. Our productivity is very, very low. And without increasing our productivity, we are going to continue having this situation where we are taxing just a few people. Now, the higher taxes, in my view, must be reflected in the ability to tax a bigger piece of the pie. Now, there are two ways. And again, let's look at what it is that we measure when it comes to taxes. You will see that the mindset is to measure tax to GDP ratio. And I'm happy Prof is here. And they will tell us that the tax to GDP ratio is less than the African average or the West Africa average. And that we need to attain 18% or 20%, whatever percentage it is. Now, there are only 3 ways we can increase the tax to GDP ratio. One is to tax those who are not being taxed. And the last time I checked, GRA itself had said that 68%, sorry. No, let me change the figure. It's 38% of businesses are the only ones they have ever audited at GRA. My question has to do with what is about the 62%. So the first is to tax those who are not being taxed. The second is to tax those who are already being taxed to pay more, which has been the approach. But there's a third option, which is to increase the output and tax the output so that we can have a larger to tax GDP ratio because the output is bigger. The truth is, even if we tax everybody 100% and attain the tax to GDP ratio, that tax will be small because the productivity is low. It's about the volume of what we produce, and it is because Singapore, for example, is highly productive. That is why the tax rate is very low, but they nevertheless raise a huge amount of money, and they are able to, as it will, become very rich. So it is important for us to realize that as part of the transformation, it is important to free the ability and give room for people to increase their production and encourage them and reward them. And once productivity goes up, then we can actually tax more. It gives us a bigger pie to be able to tax. So instead of looking at tax to GDP ratio, I recommend a new mindset where we look at tax to output ratio. And it is when we measure these things that will enable us to rethink our economic management and pursue the transformation that we all so desire. It's important we understand that economics exists because people work. It is not because of work that economics exists. And as a result, the attitude of people to work and to productivity is an important part of managing the economy. We need to change our mindset, which encourages us to be pompous about our insignificance. Every little thing that we produce, then we tend to just get so, we rest on our hours, and we think that is the end of everything that we have achieved. We used to be the largest producer of cocoa in the world. Today, Ivory Coast is producing about 3 times what we used to produce. As for soccer, the last time we won the cup was about 40-something years ago, but we used to lead. We need a mindset that encourages us to scale. Scale is very important, and it's important that we look at these mindset issues because that conscious effort is important. We need a conscious campaign to help us avoid waste. We actually waste a lot of resources and waste a lot of opportunities. I've talked about some of the things, for example, the resources that we export in this raw form when we could have added value. And the waste that SOEs normally, as it were, incur. These are things we need to look at. For a country that produces so much cocoa and premium cocoa for years, that doesn't have a chocolate hub, and that didn't create a sovereign wealth fund from cocoa, it's pathetic. That is a waste, and we need to have some of those things. Of course, I'm hoping that with things like gold board and the rest, probably a new attitude will be adopted. Again, the devil is in the detail, and time will tell. We need to stimulate business, particularly land reform. And land reform has been talked about over and over. At times when we change laws, we assume the land will be reformed because the law has been changed. No. Land is a factor of production. And clearly, it is so difficult to acquire land in Ghana, or you have to fight over it so many times. It's one of the reasons that our FDI is low. Because nobody wants to go through those unnecessary troubles, and we need to do something about it. Now, transformation on the broader scale means many things. It means, for example, living in a clean environment. How can we live in a clean environment if we do not stop people from throwing refuse into gutters? It's part of the transformation, and that's a mindset thing we need to deal with. And they get away because they belong to political parties. And it's important that we leave the district chief executives to be able to enforce. A Liverpool city and a transformed city, as an example, will have bicycle paths and walkways around it. As an experiment, the World Bank once funded a 50-kilometer bicycle path around Accra. Yes, I was part of the team that made that possible. And I can show you where the bicycle paths are. They've all been occupied by hawkers and people who sell. Indeed, during one particular election, the political parties called the people to come and occupy it, and we never regained it. That money was completely wasted. Yes. And this was after a study on a motorized transport and an attempt to make transportation easier. And Ghana was selected because it was part of a study of 10 countries in the world where the mobility needs of the urban poor was identified. Large sums of money have all gone to waste because political parties encouraged hawkers because they wanted to win election. How can we have orderly development? Because transformation will require orderly development. When trotro stations spring up anyhow, when the first trotro station was developing around Accra Mall, I had a public lecture just like this. This is way back in early 2000s, and said that AMA should stop it. And if we don't, there will be a proliferation. The rest is history. Another one began about 2 months ago. Just, you can go and check. The trotro stations and taxi stations, it just started one man parking, and then we allow it. And then once it becomes big, as soon as you want to remove them, then it becomes politics. And when it's election year, then it is not possible. How can you have a higher income when businesses complain that workers steal, and we do not address the issue of a mindset which let workers both in government and private sector steal? Productivity cannot go up in a mindset where it is okay to steal from the business. How do you watch leaders who borrow so much until we get into a debt exchange and it is okay? No. We have to have a mindset where we can check our leaders. I have, for example, recommended on a different occasion that we need to have, if there is one provision I want in the Constitution, it's a provision that will limit the ability of a government to borrow, because it comes back to taxes. How can we have better education and better facilities if we don't encourage and punish people who are in charge of our education and our hospitals. There's a data which was shown to me by a friend of mine recently, and it really surprised me that much as we have increased educational facilities, it turns out that our population growth is actually outstripping the supply of educational facilities. And it's important we take a look at this. How can we live in secure cities? Secure cities like Singapore and the rest have high levels of safety. How do we achieve that if the police stop you at night and they're asking for bribe? And these are mindset issues we need to. A policeman who is asking you, Master, and all that takes away your trust in the system. How can we industrialize when just 150 megawatts dropping out of our installed capacity will lead to fluctuations and power offs? That is the reason why, for example, I think a big push must be looking at increasing more than quadrupling our existing installed capacity. Nobody will be sitting major industrial plants in this country if two things don't happen. One, we don't have the power, and two, we are selling power at more than 6 cents per kilowatt hour. No country ever industrialized selling power at more than 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So our approach, for example, to power must go beyond just dealing with preventing doomsday to creating the base load that drives industrialization and creating the kilowatt hour purchase at a price that makes us very competitive and attract industries. Moving from talk shop to implementation, I recommend, in addition to what I have already recommended, that both private and private sector be rewarded and encouraged by being measured between every 15th to 18th month, provided what they are developing is part, or they are doing, is meeting the benchmark of government's transformation agenda. And government should be able to bring benchmarks to measure that. And the benchmarks are very simple. They should center around income growth, productivity improvement, and that means simply achieving more with less, increasing skill, giving greater access, and better ways of doing things through adopting technology. The details of this can be fashioned out by those who have the wherewithal to do it. And to reward those who have already transformed, and I will define those as who have leveraged what we already have and maximize the output that we get out of it. If we get SOEs, as an example, to publish their transformation agenda, it takes the burden off the government or the president, because if he punishes somebody for not meeting the benchmarks, we will all know why that person has been punished. For the media, I recommend a weekly mindset change slot for all media stations. And you may want to take the lead by teaming up with your other sister stations, that for every week, 5 minutes should be devoted to a mindset change, and pick any of these mindset changes or any of them that you yourself know that I have not mentioned, and discuss how do we change this mindset. I recommend similar things are done in church services, in offices, where the need for mindset change is discussed, and the people will discuss what mindset change they want to drive at that particular place, or in the church, or in the larger society. Educational institutions can do similar things, and if the media drives this, it will make it possible for us to have the mindset change that will drive the transformation that we are talking about. If we don't do that, things will continue to focus on politics. Let me draw attention before I conclude that if you take China as an example, capital investments were directed purposely towards production. In Ghana, capital investments have always been directed towards winning elections. You don't expect to transform if capital investments is directed towards winning elections. In Singapore, projects are selected for their multiplier effect. In Ghana, projects are selected for their procurement opportunity. It is important that in the new attempt to reform, we change these attitudes and drive a new mindset. That way, we can grow and have a situation where we don't have to panic If, for example, America decides they want to cancel USAID, and it has a very significant impact on our health, I would expect, for example, that we should have programs that anticipate what it is that will happen when AGOA comes to an end. And these are some of the things we need to do in order to ensure that we attain the transformation agenda. Yes, it is easy for us to set a vision and pursue transformation. But before I conclude, I will just read a tweet I made on 29th April 2021. And that summarizes it for me. And he said, if they have no skills or resources, but believe in themselves and are united, poverty is temporary. But if they have all the skills, resources, but lack self-confidence and are disunited, poverty is mental and permanent. Until a mindset change, neither prayer nor action will make them rich. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very, very much, David Ofosu-Dorte. In fact, you deserve a clap. So I like that last quote of yours, and it's something that I would, keep in mind. But you've talked about a lot of things that we have to do. I like the fact that you've talked about the media having to have a weekly mindset change programming. You say even if it's 5 minutes, it's very important. We should also discuss these things in our churches. You've talked about how, for instance, it will be important for us to increase even our electricity generating capacity. We cannot be talking about industrialization with 6,000. And you say, we don't have to buy power for more than 6 cents per kilowatt hour. You've talked about inflation. You've talked about, what the challenges we've talked about all the time. We've talked about, two major challenges, external factors and macroeconomic challenges, of which you've talked about inflation. You've talked about a mindset of keeping stock, for instance, holding on to assets when we don't need them. You're very right. When you go to, a lot of these car parks, you have vehicles that have been there for years. And, Prof is here, he would explain that later, why it's difficult for us. So things would go up. We would talk about it, okay, the prices have gone up, but they never come down. Even when people need to make sure they dispose of these things, they still would want to go for high rates. The issue of, transportation, very, very important. And the fact that consistently we've talked about how we need to improve transportation, how we need to reduce the cost of transportation so that we're able to get food products or food produce into the market. Unfortunately, consistently the conversation has been about how these market queens buy, food at farm gate prices very cheap, bring it to the market, and like you indicated, would increase it by some 100%. You've talked about some of the things that we need to do. We need to have the can-do spirit. We need to build confidence in ourselves that we can do a lot of things. But most importantly, even as we have self-confidence, we also need to have confidence in the system. And we need to have confidence in our leaders, of course, which must be earned. And you've talked about the systemic, disempowerment of our people, something that we need to work on. We worship our leaders. And you also have talked about the systemic disunity mindset that we'd have to look at. You've said business leaders need to have a transformation mindset. The think tanks, media must have say, we need an entrepreneurial mindset. A lot of things. But what we're going to do now is that we'll take a short break. When we return, David Ofosu-Dorte will be joining us here, and together with Professor Bokping, we hope to have Professor Peter Korte joining us via Zoom. We're going to get into this conversation because the most important thing is to have that mindset revolution for economic transformation. We'll be right back. All right, so welcome back, and thank you very, very much for staying with us. And I believe that you've enjoyed the presentation by our main speaker, David Ofosu-Dorte. He's been telling us, how we can transform the Ghanaian economy by having a mindset revolution. Lots of things he said. I'm going to get to Professor Godfred Bokping, who will be the discussant at this point. We'll also get to David Ofosu-Dorte at some point to get his views on other issues. But Professor Bokping, Mr. Ofosu-Dorte consistently made reference to you because of your economic background and the fact that this is a conversation we've had before. We'll get into all the other things, but maybe we can start with a bit about inflation and what we must do, because this will not be the first time you've come across this conversation. You've heard him. What else do you say we do to ensure that we deal with inflation and probably the external challenges before we get to all the things that businesses must do?
All right, thank you very much. I want to say that you made my evening. Let me put it that way. This was excellent. Yes, I agree with all that you have said. And taking it from economic transformation, he touched on the two main aspects: structural change, movement from low productivity to high productivity from agriculture. Today, he also spoke about economic transformation that should focus on productivity growth, right, within sectors, across sectors, and all of that. Very good. And I think he also made a point that actually we don't have the basics, and I agree with you. We don't have the basics for economic transformation and inclusive productivity growth. I'll come to the inflation. A dominant view in economics is that before you can have economic transformation and inclusive productivity growth, you need to maintain macroeconomic stability for long. For long. At least for a long period of time. That is where the productivity growth and innovation and all of that will come in. And one key variable of macroeconomic stability is inflation. So he identified inflation and spoke quite well about that, because as a country, one of the things we have struggled to tame, in fact, actually since independence, has been inflation. It drives so many things. Until July 1965, inflation was low. In fact, in 1964, in fact, right after independence, inflation wasn't an issue in this country. I don't want to say if you remember, right?
Because we all don't remember.
Okay, so inflation wasn't an issue. You know why? Because at that time, we only had fiscal control. We had gained our so-called independence, but we didn't have monetary control. So we were not printing money at will. Then we introduced our own cedi, July 1965. Since then, inflation has been a very difficult thing to control. So inflation that was 0.98% in 1964, we introduced the cedi in July 1965. Inflation shot up to 26.4 or so in 1965, just within that period. Since then, it's been, in fact, in the 70s, 80s, on the average, inflation was more than 125% and all of that. Now you can see what we have here. But again, the mindset issue. So, and I'll tell you why the inflation has remained or has stubbornly stuck that high. So he mentioned Singapore and their low tax rates. In fact, if you look at tax to GDP ratio and you compare that of Ghana to Malaysia, I've said that on Joy FM before, and you compare that to Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea, the difference isn't that much. Of course, it's not the same level. But the low tax to GDP ratio, even if you compare that to Southern Africa, has not constrained Ghana from spending the way it wants to spend. Because the low tax to GDP ratio, even though you have higher expenditure to GDP ratio compared to this country, because the difference is explained through borrowing. So relative to the size of our economy, we have spent, just like these countries have spent. Malaysia and Singapore and South Korea picked growth, they picked transformation, they picked development. We have spent relative to the size of our economy, but we picked inflation, we picked poverty, we picked inequality. You know why? Because the bulk of the spending we have done actually did not go to create assets, and also did not go to the productive sectors of the economy, right? And so at the end of the day, you realize that we have injected money, but because it didn't create assets that will last, it didn't go to the productive sectors, then you have more money chasing what? Fewer goods. So you check, for some time now, all that Bank of Ghana does is mopping up excess liquidity.
Yeah.
This is all the monetary policy we have been doing. Why are we mopping? Because we believe that there is excess what? Liquidity relative to baby goods. It's simply because we have, from the fiscal side, and sometimes the monetization of the deficit, we are not creating assets that will last. Look, there are some roads in this country. When they commission those roads, and you don't hurry up and go and use it, in the next 6 months, when you go, it will not be there.
How?
You're asking me how?
Yes.
It's gone. It just takes one rain.
Deteriorated.
Yeah. The next time you go, you will see potholes or boreholes. Some of them, you actually get missing. And there are some potholes in this country, they are arranged in such a way that you can't miss both, no matter how careful you are on the road. Okay, so you see that we've been doing all of this. So actually, what is happening with our inflation is that the economy's supply capacity is restricted relative to the demand side. And therefore, we use the monetary policy to eliminate what we call demand-related inflationary pressures. But actually what we need, and I agree with you, and that is where transformation, structural transformation, productivity growth comes in. What Ghana needs is not more mopping up of excess liquidity. What we need is supply-oriented policies. That is what we need.
So that would take us to the reset agenda, the 24-hour economy, and the big push. And, you know, Mr. David Ofosu-Dorte makes the point that we need a mindset to add value within the country. It also talks about the fact that infrastructural projects should give us what? Exponential growth.
Incremental.
It says not just incremental, but exponential. Yeah. Yes, it says not just incremental, but exponential growth. How do we do that? These, I mean, he's talked about it, but from your point of view also, what are the other things you believe can be done?
Well, so it will come. I was somewhere last week to give a presentation. Somebody asked me, what would it take? I said, look, have we gotten to the point where we say we want to change our situation? Again, it comes down to the mindset. Look, in this country, corrupt people have faithful disciples who will stand up to defend them compared to people with integrity. You are an endangered, you are alone if you choose to live by integrity, honesty, and more so, if you choose to talk about what is going on and all of that. It's all the mindset. And it's the reason why in economics, we are not just focusing on just modeling, regression, relationships, because underlining that data is a mindset that is driving it. And that's why these days we talk about ethics in economics, morality in economics. In fact, we talk about economic imperialism, okay, where economists use their methodologies and tools to look at other disciplines that are typically reserved for, let's say, philosophers, sociologists, and the rest of them. They all count. Look, if you look at, we've seen the cost of constructing roads in this country. And infrastructure is not just the nominal expenditure. The efficiency in your expenditure is what makes the difference. And is the efficiency aspect that we have not pursued. He also spoke about that. Other than that, you will see in our books. Look, if you take Ghana since 1992, and you pick budget after budget, and you see budgetary allocation to roads, it's huge on paper. Mm-hmm. But out there, it's not there. So come to think of it, just a couple of years ago when we heard in this country that a government had constructed more roads than any other government and all of that. But you go and check. If you look at the IMF's road quality index, which they measure through mean speed score, intercities, Ghana is not in the top 10. Ghana is not in the top 20. We are not in the top 30. In fact, we rank somewhere 36. Our mean speed score is just around 56 kilometers per hour, adjusted. Okay, so approximately 45% of economic activity is movement. It's movement of goods, services, persons, and the rest of them. So the basis for economic transformation, we don't have it. Because in this country, we have not been able to connect our cities. You just can't say, I'm going to Cape Coast and come back. That's going to take you hours. Okay.
Oh, yes. Now even with the road construction, it will take you forever.
Yes. Okay, it's going to, so we don't have the basis. Look, Europe, US, look at China, and where they are investing in the efficiency. So we are not connecting the cities. So why are you talking about transformation? Look, you have to live in Accra to work in Accra. Why? I mean, it should be possible for somebody to live in Kumasi and come to work in Accra and go back, either by rail or even by road. Because on a good road, you can do Accra Kumasi in less than 2 hours. Probably. After all, Adenta to High Street, it takes some people more than almost 2 hours in traffic and all of that. And once you do that, you actually see that housing prices will go down in Accra, because, and then again, you will be transferring people's consumption from Accra here to those regional centers. And along those roads, you see communities coming up. You also see that agriculture will become very attractive. I was happy you spoke about transportation. Look, if you get to know the role transportation plays in our food inflation, it's huge. In fact, it's also the reason why people prefer to import basic things from, let's say, Burkina Faso and other countries, because the road network is a little much better compared to going to the hinterland to go and bring the food. Sometimes the reason why we are hungry in Accra is not because our farmers are lazy. It's simply because the distance between where our mouth is and where the farmland is keeps widening. And there is no clear policy in this country to preserve farmlands.
But you see,
in the 70s.
But talking about even transportation and all of that, when it comes to food prices, since the former government statistician, Professor Kobneni, when he took over, one of the things he did with the CPI is to actually indicate areas of concern.
Yes.
So consistently, you could see prices of food items that were on the increase. Tomatoes. I mean, you give you the 20 areas where policymakers should focus on. Unfortunately, consistently, the same products had over 50, 60, 70%. The question is, did we not see these things? And is it a case of we just don't care?
Well, I think that we are not driven by the data.
How? Because you have a government statistician in place. Let me bring David Ofosu-Dorte. We had always been priding ourselves as going according to the data. We've said the data would show this, the data would show that. We've had data giving us indication, and the data was supposed to help us transform, but unfortunately, it just became data and nothing else.
I think, unfortunately, I must say the media is part of the problem, or perhaps at the center of the problem. For those of us who studied public policy, among other things, agenda setting is a very key part of what makes decision makers make decisions. And what we hear on radio is not necessarily what is of national importance. It is what some people want us to discuss. So you will notice I made a recommendation of the 5-minute slot for you to do mindset change. If the media decide that you want to focus less on politicians, I mean, just look at your airtime, just your news. And I'm not talking about Joy alone. A lot of it is significantly captured by. So the government statistician will have all this data there. The politician doesn't feel the pressure that this is something that he must act on. And they respond only to votes. I once had a very interesting conversation. The very seasoned politician. He's still alive. He's in his 90s. And he's been listening to me for years. And he always says, I like listening to you because when I listen to you, I go and use it for my politics from a different angle. And he gave me a call and came by my office. And we were talking about transportation. And he knows, I mean, the things I've done in the transport sector and all the rest. So I was telling him about the major arterial roads that could be done, which doesn't require much public money. Private sector can build it, which will open the nation up. He took the pen from me and said, you like making this interesting analysis. He mapped for all those places I had shown bypasses where, according to him, the votes were a lot. And he then showed me the roads that they had selected to build, and they were all based on votes. It had nothing to do
with economic activity.
It had nothing to do with economic activity. What Prof said, look, for me, I see development in very simple terms. What we eat is a very important part of transformation. People want to eat basic. Is food prices coming down? If they are satisfied with there is food security, food safety, and all those kind of things, And you will see that as urban areas grow, value addition and urbanized demand begin to change. How people live. This is why I talk about, why are you taking two years rent from anybody?
Yeah.
How are you expecting the person to survive? The next one is how we connect with each other. By nature, we want to connect with each other. So if I could live in Winneba, Kumasi is even far, and come to Accra, why would I want to pay that huge rent?
Yeah.
So the data is shown, but it is not part of the agenda which is discussed every day. So he pushes it away. He is called by Winston and he's discussing, have you heard what your colleague said? Then he has to respond. So for the rest of the day, that's what we... And I always say that if you want to know whether you are transforming or not, check how much of the time you are spent in a day and what you are spent it on. It's as simple as that. The more you spend it on politics and then political debate, the less you will spend on transformation. It's that simple. It's not the lack of data. It's just our minds are focused on very different things.
Great. And you talked about, what we need to do. You've talked about self-confidence. You've talked about confidence in the system. You've talked about having confidence in our leaders. You say the entire group should buy into the transformation agenda. Society must adopt the transformation mindset and they must trust their leaders. But a lot of it depends on the leaders and the system.
I said the leaders must earn the trust.
They must earn the trust. What should they be doing?
They should be consistent with what they do. When they promise, they must deliver. If they cannot deliver, they should tell us why they couldn't deliver. And when people trust you, they make excuses for you. Honestly, I get surprised when leaders think that they must lie in order to earn our trust. People see through it. When they trust you, I mean, if you've been consistent, every time you say you will do it, you will do it. Next time you're unable to do it, even when you are lying, they trust you. But when you lie so often, even when you tell the truth, they think you are lying. Just take a bit of time and play some of Lin Kuan Yew's tips. And he will tell you that they were so consistent that once he tells the people they will do it, they believe it. That it's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And for me, I'm aware about how much pressure our political leaders feel. And I say, this transformation agenda is not, or transformation and mindset change, not for political leaders alone. I'll tell you a short story, but before I come to that, it is important that the leaders themselves reduce the pressure on themselves. How do they do it? If I have appointed Winston as a minister, and I said, these are the things he says he will achieve, I am giving him 18 months. He says month 1, he will achieve this. Month 2, it's published. What's wrong with that? If you are not performing and I remove you, in fact, the people will call for your removal. That's the way to build trust and to reduce. We must be very transparent about some of this. I'm not asking that we should put state secrets in the public domain. But why can't a minister for Ministry X tell us exactly how much he is going to do or what he's going to do by this time? And by this time, he should be able to tell us. It's not magic. If you come to my office, I can tell you that. So if I can't tell you that, then you don't expect that over the period I'll build the trust. So I think those are some of the things we need to do. And if it cannot be done by the public sector, the private sector must do it. Now let me tell you the story I said I was going to.
Sure.
During his first term, President Mahama once made a promise that he was going to monitor and evaluate his ministers every 6 months. I called one business association into a meeting and said, did you hear what the president said? He said, yes. I said, let us have a criteria on how we measure his ministers. So every month 5, we will send it to him and say, this is what your ministers promised. This is what they have done. This is what they haven't done. And we give a copy to the press. And we tell the press that we have sent to the president our assessment of the ministers. I am telling you that not only will it force ministers to perform, it will free the president and it will change the conversation from politics to performance. You know what this business executive told me? Oh, if I do that, they will say I'm opposing the president. I said, which opposing president? Me. I support every president. I want him to succeed. These are my suggestions. I am saying that the man says he wants to evaluate his ministers. I am giving him an input as to what to evaluate. Why are you...
if the basis of the appointment is
that fear, that point you make, some would say fear. That fear in the Ghanaian, the fact that if you say anything, you're seen as, oh, this is an opposition member.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, you don't mind him. And they would actually go and dig and play your records to you.
You know, that is why I said, Winston, that we suffer from a systemic disempowerment. We have over the years been disempowered. Mindset is not formed just in a day. Just like Prof said that for you to transform an economy, you need to have macroeconomic stability for a significant period. Look, if we don't grow double digits for a period of about 5-6 continuous years, forget transformation. China grew double digits for almost 30 years continuous, right? Then you can transform this big. So you need to have that situation where there is that conscious effort. Now, I'm aware that people will put you here, put you there. But if you want to, I speak all the time, everybody, they will try and find out where you belong to. But you must discipline yourself to be able to decide that this is what I want to do. And any government which is doing an agenda which is good, why wouldn't you support it? I am not NDC or MPP. But if they say big push, I'm interested in, why am I not interested in big push? I'm interested in what the big push is and what will go into it. And my contribution is to suggest what should go into it. If they bring something which is not very big, then I'll say maybe it's not big push. Do you understand?
No, it's $10 billion.
A $10 billion, you know what we can do with $10 billion? And I want to show, how would they raise it? If somebody calls me, I can explain to him what I think are the suggestions, and we should be able to do this. It doesn't make you NDC. The last National Economic Forum, I saw people there. I was there. I led the infrastructure session. I did the presentation. I saw people there who I thought are MPP, but they were contributing. I may be wrong. We should be listening to the ideas people present instead of where they belong. And we need to create that culture.
We should listen to the ideas people present and not where they belong. Anything you want to say finally, Prof? Because I'm told our time is up.
Yeah, so, you know, you can evaluate your ministers if the basis of the appointment is on competence, productivity. But if it's more of a reward for loyalty and your contribution towards the party and the success, sometimes they can
have a small different opinion on that. It's not that I don't agree that the appointment should be for merit. I want to move forward from there. Whether the appointment's on merit or not is neither here. I mean, I want to move because the president has already done it. I rather want to know what is the minister supposed to deliver, even if it's not on merit. And I measure you by whether you are delivering. That way I free the president to be able to remove you if you are not delivering. And it will force in future, people will not be rushing for appointments when they don't have the capacity to deliver.
And the reason it may be difficult for the president to do so consistently may be the relationship. And
but Prof, I think...
Finally, let me just add that...
Finally, yes.
Mindset change is not about more education. It's not about getting PhD. Yeah. It's not about getting 3, 4, 5 masters and all of that. I think in this country, we focus more on getting certificates, even if that meant we didn't know anything and we have not achieved anything. Okay, so mindset is a whole paradigm shift that we need to start like yesterday, if not some decades back.
Well, we should have started yesterday, but I guess, like our people say, it's better late than never. And the time to start is today. If we have to transform the Ghanaian economy, then there's definitely time now for a mindset revolution. It must start from you, and it must start from me, because we all have a role to play. Let the discussions continue. We'll play our part, but most importantly, our leaders must earn our trust. But they only earn our trust if we don't consistently defend their non-productivity and their corrupt practices. If we hold them accountable for the promises they make, our leaders wouldn't take us for granted. My name has been Winston Amoah. You have a lovely day, and tomorrow on the Super Morning Show, we'll continue with this conversation. After all, we all ask for a mindset revolution for Ghana's economic transformation. Have a good night.